David thought it would be just another peaceful day on the water, until a curious beluga with a strange harness surfaced by his boat. Intrigued, he followed the creature, unaware that it was leading him straight into a mystery that would shake him to the core. What was the whale trying to show him? If you're curious to find out what David uncovered, hit the like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories from the unusual. He never expected to encounter a beluga while on his afternoon fishing trip. At first, he enjoyed the interaction, but when he saw it strapped in a harness, he knew this situation was more serious than expected. So he decided to follow her to find out the truth. But when he figured out where the animal had led him, David got the shock of his life. The beluga had led David on about a half-hour-long chase that brought him outside of the city and close to the very dangerous rocky shores, where stones could potentially fall at any second and crush his boat. Yet David was still determined to figure out what this beluga was trying to communicate to him. The animal eventually stopped at the entrance of a small cave. David led his boat to the shore and got out, ready to explore the cave. The beluga whale, which was still wearing the harness, was seemingly patiently waiting in the water for him. When David saw what was in the cave, it suddenly all made sense to him. This creature, and probably many more, needed his help desperately. But what did the beluga lead David to? What was the harness it was wearing, and why did it need David's help? Too bad, uttered David. He would end up finding a small signal tower that seemed to connect with the beluga. Somebody had been following its movement, and as it would turn out, this was very illegal. David ended up taking the harness off the animal and handed the case over to the wildlife police. Fishing is always peaceful, thought David, while preparing his boat. In the afternoon, he decided to go fishing, as he always did as a hobby. By the looks of it, he mused to the clear sky and the still wind. Today is going to be very, very calm. No one could argue against him, but he was quite wrong. That day would prove to be very strange. After setting up his small motorboat, David began to sail. He floated along the water with his fishing equipment at the ready. He hoped to catch some sort of exotic sea creature. However, all he did was listen to the hum of the motorboat and watch waves come and go for minutes and an hour and two. Nothing. No luck with the fish whatsoever. Normally, with such a nice day and the proper season around, David would have already caught at least a dozen fish. What a bummer, he groaned. Are these fish scared of me or something? He couldn't spot a single creature around his boat. It was like he was scaring them all. David let out another sigh and then decided that he would make one last attempt. He threw his line again into the water and relaxed, dozing off, with the boat swaying on the water's surface. He sat back, gazing at the water, which reflected the afternoon rays of the sun, when suddenly his line stirred slightly. He felt the joy rise in his heart. Finally, some action. He pulled it in slowly, taking care not to lose what he estimated as a fair-sized fish. When he tightened the line, water droplets hit him, and for a moment he saw the shade of white below it. He waited patiently, but within a flash, the line went limp, and so whatever the creature of the lake was, it disappeared. Ah, come on, David sighed and looked at the usual empty hook. He was going to quote it as bad luck, but then he saw rings of disturbance all around the spot where his line was. The water seemed to churn slightly as if disturbed by something larger than a fish. Squinting into the depths, he leaned over the edge of the boat, peering curiously. Then just as he was about to dismiss it as a fluke, he saw it again. Movement underwater. Something big, white, and gliding gracefully beneath the surface. Well, he was almost right about that, almost. Just as he was thinking about going back, he saw something out of the corner of his eye. Movement underwater. It was something big, again white, and it seemed to graciously glide. Although David was, as he often called himself, a fully grown adult, he could swear that he saw a ghost. Needless to say, it scared the living daylights out of this fully grown adult for a moment. David was stunned. "What is this thing?" he shouted as he recovered and looked around him. No animal as big as that one would have wandered so close to the city. As much as it probably wasn't a ghost, David was still alert. My, this could be a shark, he worriedly thought, or even an orca. He grabbed his harpoon menacingly, The creature started to swim to the surface, and David readied his harpoon. His grip was strong, and his aim was true, and he was almost about to throw it. But that was when he saw a beluga whale. He quickly put down the weapon, realizing there was no need to fear or attack the sea critter. Naturally, beluga whales mean no harm to humans. They are peaceful and pretty, which makes David very excited. It was the first time he saw such an uncommon mammal this close. He tried to take in every detail of the animal's emerged body, which was small compared to its submerged size. It was then, while staring at the whale, that David saw something off. "What's that?" he wondered, squinting his eyes. There was something on the beluga's neck. At first it seemed to David that it was a stray fishing net. The whale had probably gotten caught by it by accident. It was a very probable thing, especially because that region had many fishing boats that use fishing nets, and a lot of these nets could get lost. However, that was not the case with this whale. When David looked a bit longer, he could see that the ropes had a pattern. It wasn't the pattern of a fishing net. It looked like a harness, and the more David analyzed the strange item, the weirder it got. The ropes weren't worn down by the water. They were new. Just what is going on here? He thought. It was something darker than he could imagine. Eventually, David realized that the harness was put on the whale on purpose. To make matters worse, it had a sinister reason behind it all. Yet even without this knowledge, David felt the need to help the poor animal. He'd find out soon how much the whale did need his help. David sailed with his motorboat closer to the whale, but when he got close to the beluga, it simply submerged back underwater and swam away, further from his boat. Still, the whale seemed to take care not to swim too far away. "Just what do you think you're doing, Whitey?" Something crossed David's mind. Scratching his head, he wondered, "Do you even want me to get that rope off of you?" However, the whale never swam away from his boat. That meant something like the animal wanted the fisherman's help. The beluga, though, was a lot smarter than David thought. Out of nowhere, the beluga dove underwater, splashing water all over. Suddenly, it emerged a bit further in front of David's boat, looking at him. Yes, it was looking at him. Not only that, but it was also making noises, typical whale noises, the ones they make when they're trying to communicate. It was like the animal was calling David, hauling David to follow it. David reasoned logically. The only thing the fisherman could think was that the whale was saying, "Follow me." He knew how smart some sea creatures can be, and beluga whales are no exception. The animal might have been forming these thoughts and trying to communicate them to David. And as things turned out, that was precisely the case. "Heck, what else can I do?" David thought to himself. He went fishing and got nothing, and now he was seeing a beluga whale up close for the first time. Following it around didn't seem like a bad idea at all. So he started his motorboat's engine slowly and made his way toward the whale. He was careful in order not to startle the animal, but as soon as he began following the beluga, it swam away fast. It almost went out of sight, but it seemed to be aware that David wasn't keeping up, so it waited for him. This repeated for some time. David accompanied the animal while it submerged, swam, looked back, and waited. "I bet no one's going to believe this," David thought to himself, chuckling at the strange scenario. He was following a sea creature around, and not just any sea creature, a beluga whale. "Might as well not tell anyone about this, or they'll think I'm mad," he mused. He'd find out, though, that he would need to tell people about this. Things were going to become even weirder and darker. For nearly half an hour, David followed the whale. It would swim fast, then wait for him, just like before. By then, they were nearing the coast, but they were far from the harbor from which the fisherman had departed. He could already clearly see the beach and the rocky formations, without any signs of civilization around. After some more time, David realized he was quite far from the city. He was sailing along the coast in a region that had higher and more dangerous shores. As much as the fisherman was brave, he could only remember that people often told him to avoid the region he was now in, for a good reason. David looked up at the high shores and the rocks. He and the whale were very close to the coast, close enough to be hit by a rock in case one fell. That was an occurrence that was very possible and, to David's fear, relatively common. The slightest disturbance could make a very large rock roll down and hit passing boats. However, deep down, David knew that this place was where the beluga wanted him to go. Somewhere around the coast, the whale was going to show him something. Still, he couldn't shake off the feeling that something bad might happen. Maybe I should turn back, he thought to himself. He looked back at the horizon and at the city, not far away. The animal finally settled before a small, obscure opening in the cliff, into a small, dim cave carved in the side of the rock that bordered the shore. What replaced the noise was just the sound of the water below, and David being enveloped in a highly uncomfortable cold. He guided the boat slowly toward the shore, then he shuddered, which reflected in his hands as they held the wheel. The harness was still firmly on the body of the whale, and the beluga whale merely floated in the water, almost as though it expected David to do something. The eyes were large, intelligent, and appeared to be begging him in some way. David climbed out of his boat, his boots sinking into the wet sand as he approached the cave entrance. He hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the beluga. "What's in there?" he whispered to himself, his mind racing with possibilities. Could it be a trap? Was someone waiting inside? Or worse, was there more than one whale in danger? With a deep breath, he grabbed his flashlight and cautiously entered the cave. Just as unencouraging was the fact that it was extremely narrow, and the slight rays of sunlight came in from the ceiling of the tunnel that was formed by large rocks. David felt its thumping against his ribs when the light hit the wet and slippery surface of the cave. As he went further and further, he began to feel that the air was cooler, and there was a dull sound of water dripping. The further in he went, the more breathless he felt. What was he heading for? Suddenly, his flashlight caught something reflective, a glint of metal. He moved closer and noticed a chain fastened onto the wall with sullen red iron bolts. A chill ran down his spine. There were shaped things in here, things fashioned by man's hand. It was not a mere cave of creation. The subordinate beams at him, checking the chains again. David feels his heart racing a little. They were so closely set, solid, that they had only recently been set in position, probably by someone who had been employing this cave for some hidden end. His stomach knotted as his imagination conjured all sorts of disturbing scenarios. Who was using this cave, and why? Just then, he heard a low, almost mechanical hum coming from deeper within the cave. Curious and alarmed, he followed the sound, which grew louder with every step. The path opened up into a larger chamber, and there, hidden in the shadows, was what looked like an old rusty signal tower. Wires snaked across the ground, leading to a control box with blinking lights. It was a makeshift setup, but clearly, someone had been using it to track something or someone. The beluga. David's mind raced. This tower was connected to the harness the whale was wearing. Someone had been following its every move, likely tracking it for who knows how long. The thought that this innocent creature had been manipulated and controlled by humans made his blood boil. He knelt beside the control box, trying to make sense of it. The device was old but functional, with several antennae sticking out of it. He recognized some of the symbols. It wasn't just a tracking device, it could also send signals. But why? Just then, he heard a splash from outside. David's eyes widened. He quickly turned off his flashlight, his instincts telling him to hide. He crept toward the cave entrance, peering out cautiously. There in the water were more belugas, at least 3 of them, swimming slowly, and all of them had harnesses similar to the one on the whale that had led David here. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Near the shoreline, partially hidden behind some rocks, was a small boat. 2 men dressed in dark wetsuits were quietly talking to each other, pointing toward the belugas in the water. David strained to hear their conversation, but the distance and the wind made it impossible to catch every word. What he did hear sent a chill down his spine. Ready to move them tonight. The boss doesn't want anyone snooping around. The other man nodded, glancing around nervously. Yeah, we gotta be quick. The trackers are set, but we need to get them across the border before anyone notices. David's heart pounded in his chest. These men were part of an illegal operation. Smuggling, perhaps. But why use beluga whales? His mind reeled with questions as he slowly backed away, careful not to make a sound. He had to act fast. Without a second thought, David sprinted back into the cave, hurriedly dismantling the signal tower. He yanked wires free, severing the connection between the device and the Beluga's harnesses. Whatever these men were planning, they wouldn't be able to track the whales any longer. He then grabbed his phone and took several pictures of the setup, ensuring he had evidence to show the authorities. He was about to leave when he felt the ground tremble slightly. A rumble echoed from above, and small pebbles started to fall from the ceiling. David cursed under his breath. The cave wasn't stable, and if he didn't get out soon, it might collapse. Just as he turned to run back toward the entrance, he heard a loud splash, followed by a sharp metallic noise. He skidded to a stop, realizing that the men outside must have noticed something was wrong. His heart raced as he darted toward the exit, only to find the two men frantically trying to restart their boat. One of them had dropped a large metal rod into the water, which had spooked the belugas, causing them to scatter. David wasted no time. He sprinted back to his boat, adrenaline pumping through his veins. The beluga that had led him there swam up beside him, almost as if to check on him. "I'll be all right, buddy," David muttered, though his hands trembled as he started the engine. He had to get out of there, and fast. As David sped away from the shore, the men's boat finally roared to life. They were following him now, their intentions clear. He glanced back at the beluga, who seemed to nod toward the open water. David pushed his boat's engine to its limit, zigzagging between rocky outcrops, hoping to lose his pursuers. The beluga swam alongside him as if guiding him through the treacherous waters. In a desperate move, David swerved sharply, heading toward a narrow passage between two cliffs. The men's boat tried to follow, but they couldn't maneuver as quickly. Their boat scraped against the rocks, and David heard a loud crunching sound. Glancing back, he saw their boat had become wedged between two massive boulders. David didn't waste any time celebrating. He sped toward the city, his mind racing. Once he reached safety, he immediately contacted the wildlife authorities, reporting everything he had seen. When the authorities arrived, David led them back to the cave, where they dismantled the remaining equipment and freed the other belugas. In the end, it was discovered that the men were part of an international smuggling ring, using the belugas to transport illegal goods through the coastal waters. Thanks to David's quick thinking, the operation was shut down, and the belugas were released back into the wild. As David watched the belugas swim away, now free from their harnesses, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of relief. He had gone out for a peaceful afternoon of fishing, but instead he had uncovered a dark, dangerous secret. "I'll never forget this day," David whispered, watching the beluga who had saved him disappear beneath the waves.